Hey guys, just wanted to jump on here really quick. I've had a lot of people reach out to me in terms of how they can support what I'm doing. I am doing this full time now, and if you'd like to contribute, if you like and value the work that I'm doing and like to contribute, on every single episode, I have a title "Support My Work." Underneath it, there's a Venmo, Locals, Cash App, or if you prefer not to use one of those methods, you can mail a check or money order to PO Box 25383, Scottsdale, Arizona 85255 9998. So, again, thank you for all the support. Appreciate it and look forward to more conversations ahead. Dr. Roberts, good morning. And I thought it was important that you and I talk based on events that happened over the weekend. And to me, all this information is coming out so fast that you can't even hang on to this conversation. I told you I got to put it right out because tomorrow, God only knows what's going to happen today. I already saw that Trump and Trudeau are scheduled to have a call at 3 Eastern today. So I don't know what that will entail. I watched his press conference when he got off the plane last night landing in DC, and he said he didn't think anything dramatic would change after that call. So, segueing into your article that you posted yesterday, titled U.S. to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China on February 1st and tyranny on America. Dr. Roberts, where are we at with all this? What were your first thoughts when you knew it was coming? So, what did you think when it actually went ahead?
You mean the tariffs?
Yes.
Well, I've pointed out for a long time that the tariffs are not a way to bring jobs home. Now, I don't really know why Trump is imposing tariffs. Um, it seems to be because he thinks that somehow uh, China and Mexico and apparently now Canada are taking advantage of us in trade, because we have trade deficits with those three countries. And so he may be looking at those trade deficits and seeing in his mind evidence that they are taking advantage of us. Um, it's not the case. Who's taking advantage of us are our own corporations and Wall Street. And basically, most of the goods and services that we import from China and Mexico and Canada are the offshore production of American firms. This is particularly true of Mexico and China. I don't know to what extent it's true of Canada. So, what has happened since the collapse of the Soviet Empire, which caused China to open its vast labor market to the United States, and also caused socialist India in those days to open its vast labor market to the United States, is that American industry, pushed by Wall Street's greed for ever more profits, relocated their production for American markets offshore. This was at the expense of the American workforce and the cities and states that had been the homes of American manufacturing. Um, Many of these cities and states lost tremendous amount of population when the manufacturing was shipped out to Asia and to a lesser extent Mexico. Well, when the production of the American firms, for example, in China, Apple, Levi, Nike, when all of these goods come back into the United States, they enter as imports. And so they worsen the trade deficit. And so what has happened is the offshoring corporations have inflicted the trade deficit on the United States by moving their production offshore. That is, their production for the U.S. market offshore. And so the goods come in and they are imports. And this process of offshoring manufacturing also deprives Americans of the incomes associated with the production of the goods and services that they consume. So it's cost us income for the population, it's cost the careers of the manufacturing workers, and it's cost the states and cities their tax base. So this horrendous cost is so the corporations can have higher profits from lower labor cost. And the higher profits then are the justification for the enormous bonus payments, the performance bonuses of the executives of the corporation. So it's essentially the corporations looting America. Our own corporations are looting us. They're looting us of jobs, of careers, of tax base, and they are imposing a trade deficit. Now, this has nothing to do with the fault of China or the fault of Mexico. It has to do with the offshore relocation decisions made by American corporations. Now, of course, the corporations didn't have a lot of alternative because Wall Street told them, move offshore or we will finance takeovers of your corporation and move it offshore. So it was a coercion. And so if this is the situation, and it is, there's no doubt whatsoever, almost all of these goods that come in are the offshore production of American firms. Then what do the tariffs do? They end up being passed on to consumers if the product of the offshored firm is price elastic. That means if the quantity of the product demanded is sensitive to price, or the extent that it's sensitive. If it's really not sensitive, then the price gets passed on. If the price is inelastic, then if it's price sensitive, it can hit the producer. If it's insensitive to price, the consumer pays it. Well, let's think about some of these products that are coming in. What is a likely effect? For example, we get a lot of automobile parts. And there's two different categories. One of the parts, like replacement parts for cars. Suppose your fuel pump goes out, or your coils, or some element in the electronic control system. Which a lot of these parts come in from China. They are not very well made. Many of them fail. I've had situations where the part had to be replaced 3 times before one of them functioned. So I've sent a car off to be repaired. It comes back. It doesn't work. I send it back. They replace it. It comes back. It doesn't work. I send it again. Well, those kinds of replacement parts for cars that are in use. Then there are parts that are supplied to the automobile assembly plants that remain in the United States. The the extent that the Americans still produce cars, they don't. They assemble them from pieces made elsewhere. Well, I think it's correct that a large number of parts that go into brand new cars to be assembled come from Canada. Well, can the automobile assemblers pass on a 25% increase in the price of these parts that come in from Canada? What does that do to the price of the car? How many pieces of the car being assembled are being hit by a 25% tariff? So you could have a situation where it leads to a serious decline in auto assembly in the United States. If too many of the parts are hit, the price rise is too high to be passed on very easily. So what happens in that case? Does the tariff punish Canada, or does it punish the auto assembly workers in the United States? What happens to the profits of the American car companies if they have to substantially curtail production? So the downside of the tariffs is obvious. What is the upside? Well, it doesn't bring the jobs back. It's an attempt to punish China and Mexico for actions of U.S. corporations. So this makes no sense as an economic policy. What would you do if you were actually trying to bring the jobs home? That is, bring American manufacturing back to America so that Apple computers and iPhones and watches are made in the United States with an American workforce, so that Nike shoes are made in the United States with an American workforce, so that Levi jeans are made in America with an American workforce. How do you achieve that? Well, I think the easiest and surest way to achieve that is to tax American corporations based on the geographical location of where they produce their products. If they produce their goods that they sell to Americans in America, you get a low tax rate. If they produce the goods they sell to Americans offshore in China or somewhere, they get a high tax rate. And you make sure the tax rate is so much higher that it more than offsets the cost advantage of producing in China. Then they make more profits by bringing the jobs home. That's the only way, I think, that you can get the manufacturing back. I don't think the president has the dictatorial power to order the firms to bring the stuff home, but they can be incentivized to do it by using the tax system to wipe out the cost advantages of producing abroad. If they come back, then again, we become a country that makes things. We again have high value added jobs for the workforce that allow them a middle class existence. The ladders of upward mobility would be reinstalled, and the sort of constant sinking into debt of such a large percentage of the American population would end, and people could start clawing their way out of debt and again getting on a rising upward movement. That's what needs to be done. So the approach is completely wrong. And moreover, there is something else very disturbing about it. Traditionally, tariffs have been a legislative matter. You can't have the president declaring a tariff. It's something that Congress passes. It's always been. I mean, the president can support tariffs. He can advocate Congress raising them. But they've always been a legislative issue. For example, what is called the American Civil War. It most certainly was not a civil war. A civil war is when two parties are fighting over the control of the government. The southern states had left the Union. They had their own country. They weren't fighting to control the government in Washington. They were fighting because they were invaded. Why were they invaded? Lincoln made it perfectly clear. They refused to pay the moral tariff. The day before Lincoln was inaugurated, the Congress, dominated by the North, passed a tariff. It was a dramatic increase in the tariff rates. Lincoln, in his inaugural address, and also the same day that Congress passed the moral tariff, they passed a resolution promising the southern states to forever protect slavery, that never under any condition would there ever be an end of slavery if the southern states would support the tariff. Well, the southern states were far more concerned about the tariff than they were about slavery, and they refused and left the Union. And that's why the Civil War occurred. Lincoln invaded to force them to pay the tariff. And the whole purpose of the tariff was to protect Northern industry from British industry, because British industry, having been the first, was entrenched, institutionalized, extremely efficient, and Northern industry couldn't get going. It had to have protection. And so who did the tariff really fall on? It fell on the South, because it meant the industrial goods that they brought in from England would now come from the North at much higher price. And it meant that England would now impose tariffs on Southern cotton. So the South would be hit with less revenues from less exports and less revenues from having to pay a tariff. So it was a legislative issue. Lincoln didn't declare the tariff. The Congress passed it. Every tariff we've ever had, I think, the Congress has passed. The tariffs in the McKinley years, just after the turn of the 20th century, President McKinley, these were passed by the Congress. McKinley supported them, but now we have a president usurping executive authority as if he's a dictator and imposing a tariff. Well, what we're seeing here is a transformation that's been going on in the United States for some time, but has greatly accelerated in the 21st century, of Congress losing power to the executive. And this is the way the Roman Senate was eventually eliminated by the Caesars. The power just trickled away out of the hands, and the Republic, as the power trickled away, the Republic transformed from a republic into a Caesarship. Well, I think that's what's going on in the United States. Um, a huge step in that direction was taken, of course, by Lincoln. Another huge step was taken by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the New Deal, because they created all of these federal agencies, and the federal agencies have essentially taken the power of legislation away from the Congress. When the Congress passes a law today, it is essentially an authorization bill for some federal agency to write the law according to how it writes the regulations imposing the law, so that the Congress can think it's doing one thing and the regulatory agency can turn it on its head and do something else. We may have talked about this previously, I don't know, but the 1964 Civil Rights Act is a perfect example. The 1964 Civil Rights Act explicitly in statutory language prohibits racial quotas, prohibits what they call affirmative action. And the first thing the EEOC, the regulatory bureaucracy for that law, did was to impose quotas. Quotas in university admissions and hiring and promotion. All of that is strictly illegal in the statutory language. And yet we've been living with it now for 50 years or more. So these types of encroachments by the executive on the legislative power is always what happens when a democracy or a republic degenerates into a dictatorship. So that's perhaps the worst downside of these, what are they, mandated tariffs? And where's Congress? Are they saying, hey, this is our power, not yours? What are you talking about? I haven't heard any of this. So there seems to be a general acceptance now that there's no real limit on executive power. Now, I can see how this has come about, because the country is so split, the Congress essentially can't function. You know, a democracy requires unity. When you have a Tower of Babel, when you have all kinds of disparate ethnic groups with different interests, different values, when you have these types of situations, and you have now ideological parties. You know, it used to be the Democrats represented the unions and the Republicans represented, or the labor force, you see, and the Republicans represented business. And it wasn't an ideological thing, it was an interest-based. And you could make deals, you could come to agreements. But when you get an ideological force like the Democratic Party is today, they're not interested in deals. They're interested in prevailing for their ideology. So you can see that if Congress really can't deal with anything, why the president takes on more and more authority. It's the only way anything can get done. And this is what happened to Rome. The Senate got where there was more disunity than unity, and so all of a sudden there was a semi-dictator. And the first ones weren't even Caesars. They had some other titles and they were temporary. And then it developed into a Caesarship. And Julius Caesar himself was not exactly a Caesar. And even his successor was very careful to give the appearance that there was still a Senate and a republic. But after that, it degenerated pretty quickly. And so I think that's another downside of what appears to be an executive mandate of tariffs, and that's an area that's in the Congress's authority. So I think that explains it. First of all, recap, the tariffs don't bring the jobs home. The tariffs in the case of offshored parts for auto assembly are going to cause some kinds of problems for the price of cars or the number sold, and for what purpose? And then we have the question of is this a further erosion of the balance of power that the founding fathers set up? Is this further intrusion of executive authority on the legislature? You know, in the end, the Roman Senate was powerless. It had no authority at all. And we may be starting to reach that point in the United States.
What was the justification, if you go back in time, with the North putting those tariffs in, under Lincoln, and then also with McKinley? Were they deemed successful? Because Trump has talked about, historically, he referenced tariffs were used 1870 to early 1900s with success.
All the tariffs have always been successful. The notion that America developed on free trade is absolute total ignorance. There's not a scrap of evidence. We've never had a period in which we developed on free trade. This is part of the propaganda. It's a free market libertarian propaganda. It has no basis in reality. We had high tariffs from the beginning. Tariffs is what financed the government until 1913 when they passed the income tax. In fact, the tariffs continued to finance the government. It wasn't until World War I think it was about 4 years after the income tax was passed, that the income tax raised any revenue. And so the entire government was always financed by tariffs. There wasn't any income tax. And they were high. They were higher before the moral tariff. You can get a chart of them. I've got one somewhere. They were very high, say around 1818. Then they came down. And then with the Lincoln, or just before Lincoln, the moral tariff, they go way back up. And they stay up, and that's what industrialized the United States. And of course, they were high in the late 1800s, 1890s. They were high with McKinley. And we've just always had the high tariffs until we became the supreme industrial power. And we owe that to World War II because it destroyed all other industrial countries. And we were the only remaining. And so I would think that the free trade regime in the United States is a very limited period of time. And it came after our dominance, after our development. So, and people say, the tariff hurts the consumer. Well, that's the first step in the analysis. But if you stop there, you've got total ignorance. Because how does the tariff hurt the consumer? When it preserves his job, when it preserves high value added income jobs, when it keeps purchasing power at home in our hands and not in the hands of foreigners selling us stuff. The United States basically was a self-efficient economy. I mean, even in the 1950s and 1960s, I I can remember Paul Samuelson. He was the most important economist of the time, and he made the point over and over: look, we're self-sufficient. We produce all our own needs. Our market is huge. We don't need any bigger market. When I was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, if memory serves, the only item in which the United States had a trade deficit was oil. What do we sell today? Scrap iron, scrap paper. I mean, maybe some agricultural commodities. We're no longer an industrial exporter. So the whole notion that the tariff hurts the consumer is false. It protects jobs. It protects high-income jobs, high-value-added jobs. It protects domestic purchasing power. It provides tax bases for the manufacturers, for the cities and states they're located in. Now, this doesn't hurt anybody. This helps. Without tariffs, the United States would never have developed. It couldn't possibly have dealt with the efficiency of the British. And it's the whole reason Lincoln imposed tariffs and took us to a civil war. You know, the Americans have never had casualties in any other war, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War. They come close to the casualties of the Civil War. It's almost like the Civil War casualties exceed the casualties of every other war the United States has been in. It's over tariffs. And the North was desperate. They had to be developed. They wanted to open up the West. Somebody's got to make the rails for the railroads, the locomotives. They've got to. The business opportunities were tremendous. Lincoln, all his life, was a lobbyist for the railway companies. You can see how the reality, how things really happened. And the South, all of the political fights between North and South was over the South trying to keep a balance in the Congress. You remember the Missouri Compromise, for example. The whole purpose was to keep a balance of representatives between North and South so the North couldn't impose tariff. Or a very high one. And so that's the story.
What do you do then? Mexico, China, and Canada. What happens? And he mentioned over the weekend or Friday that the European Union will be receiving tariffs as well. So what do you do if you're those countries?
Well, it's the same thing with China. Where did China get its development? From the offshore American firms. Where's Mexico getting its development? From the offshore American firms. Europe, of course, what do they sell us? Well, the Germans sell us cars, good ones. Good cars in Germany. They cost a lot, but they're good, they're well made. They have good performance. But these industries are already moving out. Why? Because of the American sanctions on Russia have driven up the cost of energy so much. It's questionable where Germany will have an auto industry. Where is it going? Well, maybe it's moving to America. So what happens? Well, Germany becomes a third world economy. Development in Mexico stops. Canadian industries that are supplying American automobile assembly. So you have to remember, automobile assembly is different from automobile production. It used to be an American car, all the parts were made here. And everything in it was American, every screw and nut and bolt. And well, today, the parts are everywhere and they come here and are assembled. So that basically our automobile workforce is an assembly plant. It's not a production plant. It assembles parts and it puts the car together, kind of like building a Lego. You have all these pieces, you put them together. Well, the firms involved in that are going to be hurt. And so, and do these tariffs also, are they going to go on food? Because, one of the globalist things was we'll be dependent on food imports. I don't know if you notice, and you go to the supermarket, but how much of the fruits and vegetables and berries, they all come from South America. And so what we've done is destroy our own productive firms in order to develop productive firms in the rest of the world. And this works for them, and it doesn't work for us. And the only reason we could do it and get away with it was that the dollar is the world reserve currency, and so everyone's willing to hold our debt. So we can go deeper and deeper and deeper in debt, and all of the doom that's been predicted about the debt never happens. Why? Because American debt is the reserves of the world banking system. So if our debt goes up, their reserves go up. They're happy. So when you get in this type of situation, clearly tariffs is not the way to go about it. You have to gradually pull back your industry. Even the way I propose, using differential tax rates, you probably would have to kind of phase that in so that as you are recovering, the other countries have time to develop their internal markets. It was years ago that I advised the Chinese that they could not rely indefinitely on exporting to America or on American firms producing in China with Chinese labor the goods that were sold in the United States, because the capacity of the United States over time was diminishing, and they would have to develop their own internal markets. I mean, after all, they have 1.2 billion people. That's 3 times our market. And so I said, develop your market. And as you do, you should expel the American firms. Keep the ones that are producing for your markets, but the ones that are producing for American markets, send them back. Because, a country cannot really exist if it has no self-sufficiency. And we've managed to do it because we're the reserve currency. But if the sanctions, the weaponization of the reserve currency that has been Washington's tactic or strategy now for the entirety of the 21st century, this causes the dollar to lose its world currency role, because it's risky to hold your reserves in dollars. Look what happened to the Russians. Their entire dollar reserves were seized. And we've done it, I think, to the Venezuelans. We do it to anybody that doesn't do it, we tell them. And so countries that want to be sovereign, it costs them. They have to pay the price of our sanctions. So it's a situation that fools got us in. Anybody should have known the last thing a country wants to do is to be food dependent on imports. What in the world? I mean, the last thing you want is a population where everything they consumed is produced offshore. This is the opposite of economic development. And so that's what globalism is. It's one of the most stupid things anyone ever came up with. And of course, entirely destructive. And now the only way we could get out of it is other countries are going to be hurt by us trying to rescue ourselves, by us ceasing to be the source of their rise. I can remember it wasn't that long ago when all the American strategic thinkers said, oh, it'll be 50 years before we have to worry about China. I said, oh, no, it's 5 years. What are you talking about? I said, well, we're putting our entire technology, all our business know-how, all our manufacturing in China. They're going to be going up while we go down. It's going to be like this. There's China. Here's us down here. I just read that somehow China is about 3 times our manufacturing strength. So, yes, there's a problem in us rectifying our situation because it will hurt other countries.
So, so this is what I'm missing here, because is the goal then why they did this, why this administration did this, is to crush other companies or crush other countries to make our dollar stronger, so we're kind of the last man standing in this sort of Hunger Games of tariff war? I mean, I'm simplifying it, but...
Well, as I said, the tariffs are going to hurt what is left of American manufacturing is assembly. And since all the parts are made offshore, the tariffs are going to hit us too. And I don't really, if the tariffs don't raise the cost enough that we stop offshore production, they'll just do harm. So it'd probably be better just to begin with the differential tax treatment and to phase it in so it doesn't hit all at once. If you phase it in, it gives the other countries time to try to develop their internal markets and not just rely on having their labor produce goods for American firms that are sold in the United States. But any way you look at it, there are going to be problems and difficulties. And this is the consequence of having a wrong economic policy for so many years. The offshoring was mindless. It was a mindless thing done by small-minded, greedy little fools on Wall Street and in executive offices of corporations. It ruined the country.
When did that start?
It began with it started in some ways with television sets being made in Japan. But in the large scale that it developed, it began with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why? Because when the Soviet Union collapsed, it convinced the socialist countries and the communist countries like China that there really wasn't an alternative to markets. And so they both changed their policies. Before the Soviet Union collapsed, an American firm couldn't go into China and set up a business and hire Chinese labor. Or you couldn't go into India. It was socialist.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you said that earlier. Okay, so it was this, when the fall of the Soviet Union. That's what really took it to this place.
Because it convinced the Chinese leadership and the Indians that there wasn't any future in communism and socialism. And so they opened to markets. And once that happened, Wall Street saw that the profits of American corporations would go up if they substituted Chinese labor for American labor. I think at the time, not counting fringe benefits, it was $25 an hour for American manufacturing labor. It was 25 cents an hour for Chinese. Well, you look at that difference, you're talking about hundreds. The difference in wage cost. And so the profits would just balloon. And once Congress had limited executive pay to $1 million, unless it was performance-based, well, then lowering labor cost is performance-based.
So they got big bonuses.
The bonuses now dwarf their official pay. The bonus, your reward comes in the bonus. And so everything the corporations have done since, there's an idiotic thing the Congress passed, limiting the tax deductibility of an executive pay at $1 million. Because everything they do now is to make profits go up. So what else have they done? Well, they don't have employees, they hire contractors. Well, they lose loyalty. Service goes to hell. And after a while, you run out of things you can cut. And then you can't get any more bonuses. So the way the system has been run, it's almost like you had idiots at every level of the corporation, at every level of government, and all of the economists in the universities. Because this was not just permitted, it was encouraged. In fact, it was coerced. You had to move offshore. So it was an amazing act of self-destruction, the United States. And Trump is right to see that. But I don't think tariffs will fix it. You see, tariffs, the whole function, Mike, of tariffs is to protect your industry. But you've got to have industry.
So say we don't have industry here.
If you don't have industry, what are the tariffs protecting? You see, the purpose of tariffs is to protect industry. So you first have to have industry. We moved ours offshore, or we moved enough of it offshore that we are, are we semi-manufacturing? I don't know. But the industry that tariffs protect, our industry, is in Mexico and China. and maybe Indonesia and Laos and Vietnam, and maybe in Canada. I don't know if all the firms in Canada that are sending stuff here, I don't know if they're American or Canadian, and I don't know if the Canadian auto parts are actually made in Canada. They may be companies that are having them supplied from China. I don't know. But the Trump people should look into this in detail very closely and understand that it goes much deeper than the surface area that they're treating it. And then their opponents, particularly the libertarians who are going on about, well, it only hurts consumer. They need to understand that we developed on the basis of tariffs, and they didn't hurt the consumer. They wrecked the South. The agricultural South was wrecked. But largely by war for resisting tariffs. But these issues are just simply ignored. And you put them together, what's going on at the same time, Mike, was the financialization of the economy. The economy was being financialized. And what that means is that a larger and larger and larger percentage of people's incomes goes into debt service. So they haven't got any discretionary income to drive the economy. And when you take these two things together, you have disaster. And that's what Trump's inherited. He's inherited the disaster. And it's not obvious to people for the simple reason the dollar's the world reserve currency. We pay our bills not by making things, but by printing money. Because they're willing to hold our debt. So of all the countries on earth, we can have a huge trade deficit, produce nothing. And they'll accept U.S. Treasury bonds as our export for their goods and services. And that's the way the country's working. And I don't think that this has entered Trump's head or any of his economic advisors' heads. And I don't really know what they're trying to do with these tariffs. And it's like you said, okay, so they're going to destroy Europe. But they don't need the tariffs. They're doing that with energy sanctions. They're doing that with forcing the European countries to prepare for war with Russia. Well, if you're going to go to war with Russia, you're certainly going to be destroyed. So it's a form of mindlessness, and it's the result of all sorts of things: insouciance, greed, short-term maximization, making decisions for the next quarter's profit report. China doesn't make decisions like that.
I've got a alert came through my phone, and it's from President Trump on Truth Social, and he wrote, "I just spoke with President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico. It was a very friendly conversation wherein she agreed to immediately supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border separating Mexico and the United States. These soldiers will be specifically designated to stop the flow of fentanyl and illegal migrants into our country. We further agreed to immediately pause the anticipated tariffs for a 1-month period, during which we will have negotiations headed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, and high-level representatives of Mexico. I look forward to participating in those negotiations with President Sheinbaum as we attempt to achieve a deal between our two countries."
Yeah. Well, then that's could be one of the reasons for the tariffs. you know, the art of the deal. You never really know. And so, okay, you're going to pay 25% uh, or yeah, tariffs on stuff from Mexico is going to be 25%. So that's probably going to cut down the amount of stuff that comes in. And so that would come back and reduce employment in Mexico. So she says, I think we can make a deal on the border. They may cut some deal with Canada. There may be something else they want. You know, I don't think Trump really wants Canada as part of the United States. If we had that brainwashed liberal population in Canada, he'd never get elected. Anybody that would elect Trudeau and keep him in office all those years would never vote for Trump. So, I mean, that would be the huge step backwards to incorporate Canada. I mean, really, look at it. Trudeau, I mean, this guy is amazing.
Well, there might be
So
some.
maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just a way to force them to do other things. But the real question remains: no matter no matter what deals or what, the question remains is: we have been deindustrializing or becoming less of a manufacturing powerhouse. Recently, I quoted on some show, I don't know if it was yours or not, the population declines that hit our major manufacturing cities. You know, like Detroit lost 25% of the population. Gary, Indiana, 22%. St. Louis, 20%. I mean, these are dramatic hits on our largest cities. What did that do to their tax base? You know, what did it do to the real estate market? These were the cost of the performance bonuses for the corporate executives. They cut down the size of our greatest cities by a fourth, a fifth, or a fourth. That goes to tax base. That goes to real estate market. Where did it all go? It went into the pockets of the executives of the corporations who moved the jobs to China or elsewhere. How is that a common sense policy? It's not. It's insanity. It's not free trade. It's nothing to do with free trade. The theory of free trade, capital stays at home. It finds its comparative advantage at home. When it leaves the country, it's broken the free trade model. And yet, how do the free trade economists, free market economists, they seem to think free trade is just letting business do whatever it wants. And so we had Wall Street and American corporations, they sold out the country. And so that's who Trump should be focusing on, not China. China was just the recipient of what our corporations brought them: technology, business know-how.
I know I'm running out of time here with you, but I did want to ask, what are your thoughts on Elon and his team involved in the Treasury and finding some of the I don't even want to use the word discrepancy, but one, what do you think of him being part of this? And two, What do you think of what he's found so far?
You know, I think that he's absolutely right that there's a massive uh, waste and corruption because bureaucracies grow forever. And in order to grow, they have to constantly do things. And over the years, they've protected themselves. So there's really no accountability. So it has to be cleaned out. The vast, when I was in Treasury, I had 2 departments reporting to me. I had 200 people reporting to me. About 12 of them were useful. Rest of them, if they weren't there, I would never have known it. So I'm sure this is true everywhere. Also, I found out I had one senior level guy, and he came to work drunk every day. And the people in his division were complaining it was demoralizing, and I had to do something about it, and so on. And I called him in and talked to him and said, "Would you like paid leave and get yourself straightened out so you can perform again?" And he said, "No." And so I said, "God, am I going to have to fire him?" So I asked, and I literally could not fire him. To fire him would have taken a full year of my life doing nothing else but assigning him tasks and evaluating his performance. And then I would have to go before a board after doing this for 1 year and make the case that he hadn't performed the assignments. Well, this is all subjective. The board might, what are the board going to do? It's made up of them. They're going to protect them. So I said, "There's no way." So I found an administrative office in the Treasury that didn't really do anything, a bureaucracy. And they just like to have more positions. So I offered them his position, and they took him.
You shipped him
So
off.
that's how I ended the crisis. I couldn't hardly get anything done. Everybody was coming up saying, "He's drunk again. You've got to do something." And Reagan had given me a job to do, and I couldn't do the job because of this guy. Well, I'm sure this is a problem. And I remember reading in the Washington Post during the Clinton years. I was in Washington. I remember reading that the Clinton people were forcing the senior civil service, which was largely white male, into early retirement to make room for blacks and women. Well, there went competence. There went merit, because the people that came in because of their skin color and their gender. And the people that went out had competed in competitive tests, performance over the years, that sort of thing. And it was a tremendous loss in the competence and integrity of the civil service. Because I remember when it happened, the people that I had relied on in the Treasury all left. And I said, wow, I mean, what would an assistant secretary do now that had the task I had? and these people are gone. So what do I think? Well, I puzzle, how Musk has the authority to get away with it. So I assume that Trump people have decided that there's no alternative but simply to run over the system because it's so broken, it's so out of shape. If you go by all the rules and all the rest, nothing can be done. And if nothing can be done, then we'll just continue to go down the drain. And so we'll just have to run over it. And I think that's true. And the downside I've already covered. It's the use of executive authority. It's what we saw happen in Rome. It had to happen because the Senate ceased being functional. Well, then we have a situation now. The United States government is dysfunctional. Its only function is to block anything from happening. Well, we're dying because of that. So there's really no alternative to this use of executive power. The downside may be that we no longer have the balance of power, that the executive is predominant. But what are you going to do if nothing can be changed? I mean, look at Trump's first term. We couldn't do anything. So I think that if we're going to exist in some form, Musk and the rest of them are just going to have to run roughshod over the obstacles. There's no other way of changing them. The Democrats have recruited ideologues for years and years. If you look at, I think maybe we covered this, I can't remember. If you look at the campaign contributions of the federal bureaucracy, it's almost entirely Democrat. There's no Republicans in the civil service. Well, and what do we know? What's happened to the Democrats? They're not the same Democrats that I remember when I was in the congressional staff. It's different. Those people weren't ideologues. Some of them were actually really good leaders. But today, they're ideologues. They want privileges for transgendered people, and they want to punish you for being white and privileged. And it's an amazing, and they want to teach kids they're racist and they're born in the wrong bodies. And all of this stuff is in the agencies now. I pointed out the other day, even the Treasury Department is supposed to raise revenues, finance the debt, and deal with economic policy. It's got two whole divisions devoted to diversity, equity, inclusion. In the Treasury, that's not a Treasury responsibility. So when you have a situation like that, it's clearly out of control. What are you going to do about it? They're not going to help you. You have to fire them. You have to run over it. And so I don't know. I hope Musk gets away with it, because otherwise there's no change at all. There's nothing can be done. I just think back. See, I'm talking about when I was in Treasury 40 years ago. It was a different world, and it was already almost impossible to do anything.
Yeah, Catherine Austin Fitts was talking in regards to Elon about him having access to the system with the kind of the banking he's trying to set up through his own platform, and is that a conflict of interest?
I don't know. Why does it matter? I don't think it matters. The only real question is, can the government be brought under control, and can it become a balanced thing again? Can we clear it of an ideological agenda to remake America into some kind of a Tower of Babel, Sodom and Gomorrah Tower of Babel? That's the policy of the Democrats. They want a Tower of Babel and they want Sodom and Gomorrah. They legalize sexual perversity. The American people are different. They don't really adhere to this. So something has to be done, and we just have to pay the cost of it. It won't be free. But if you don't do anything, that's going to be a high cost too. And the main thing, once again, is how much longer can we exist as a country that doesn't make things for its own people or for export and live on the willingness of the rest of the world to accept our debt. Again, here's the anomaly. Most countries make things, industrial countries, they sell them abroad. They get foreign exchange. They use that foreign exchange from what they have made and sold to buy things abroad they need at home. What do? We don't make or sell things. We buy things and we pay for it with debt. And the world holds the debt because it's the reserves of central banks. So we export debt to pay for goods and services we import. A large percentage of these goods and services we import are the offshore production of our own companies. So it's doubly insane. It has to be stopped, or we simply are going to be a third world country. Particularly if they get rid of Trump and the Democrats get back in and the borders reopen. You can't absorb several million people a year who don't know the language, who don't know anything about you, haven't got any skills. Where do they go? So, yeah, there'll be cost. I've already said, in my mind, the biggest cost is a further enhancement of executive authority, the diminution of Congress. But it's Congress's own fault. They're dysfunctional, so they're losing their function. You have to look at things really with open eyes. And so, Catherine Fitz, what she says is probably true, but it's just one of the costs. But I really don't think Elon Musk needs the help of the government to be successful. I mean, look at him. Look at him. Remember now, we've got 2 astronauts in space. They went up for 8 days. They've been up there 7 months and we can't get them back. Now, allegedly, more than a half a century ago, we walked on the moon. Allegedly. But half a century later, we can't get 2 astronauts back from the space station. So Trump had to ask Elon Musk to go get them. We have to ask a private guy with a private company to go get our astronauts and bring them home. Now, is this not a collapse? How can you see this as anything but collapse? What was the other alternative? we could ask Putin to go get them and bring them home for us, since we are incompetent and can't get our own astronauts back. Well, you tell me, how did we go from walking on the moon in the 1960s to 2024, 2025, and we can't get two people off the space platform? There you see massive decline, massive collapse. Do you think that can continue for another half century, and is anything left?
No.
So something has to be done. It's going to be costly, assuming it can be. I'm not sure that Trump and Elon will succeed, but at least they're trying, which is something we haven't seen in a long time.
Where can people find you, Dr. Roberts?
Well, just my website, www.paulcraigroberts.org. And I hope this has been clear, because no one's talking like this. I'm the one explaining what's actually going on, and you can't find anything wrong with what I've said.
As always, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay.
As always, thanks for coming back on. And, I always appreciate you making yourself available. So I look forward to our next conversation, and God only knows what might happen between today and tomorrow.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? And thank you for sharing your audience with me. I'm grateful, and I hope people don't get carried away with all of the BS and all of the confused, snappy sounds. I mean, it's a difficult problem, and it'll be costly.
Thank you, Doctor. Mic drop.
All right.